Can King Leopold II be compared to Hitler? I wonder if the comparison would be unfair to Hitler. The man, Adolf Hitler, in his time, never concealed his intentions. He wrote a book about it 10 years before he ever came to power, filled with anti-Semitic vitriol, and his plans for a war of revenge against the World War I allies and the Jews, who he blamed for Germany's defeat. He told the whole world what he intended to do, got voted into office anyway, via having the largest party in the Reichstag, and then was allowed to pursue his agenda unmolested until it was almost too late. If a man gives you fair warning that he intends to commit horrific crimes, and you ignore his warning, that doesn't make it right. But I would argue that those who sat idly by and allowed him to do it bear some culpability. On the other hand, our man here, Leopold II, who was the first cousin of Queen Victoria of Britain, and later became the Duke of Brabant in 1846 while serving in the Belgian army, is a man who lobbied to gain control of the Congo basin with the intention of stamping out slavery, diseases like African sleeping sickness, and of other humanitarian projects in the area. He even created a foundation for the purpose and openly criticized the colonial regimes of other European powers. He was so convincing that he got the whole territory, the entire modern nation of Congo-Kinshasa, deeded not to the Kingdom of Belgium, but to King Leopold II alone. As soon as he had achieved his aim, he did away with the foundation and instituted a brutal colonial regime, one as bad as anything the Spanish conquistadors, the medieval Arabs, or even the Nazis later on ever came up with.
Many people do not know that Belgium itself carried out crimes against humanity in its occupation of today's Congo in southwest Africa. Belgian King Leopold II, who reigned as King of Belgium from 1865 to 1909, and as the ruler of the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908. Over the last few years, many Belgians, including many of African descent, have brought much of what happened in the Congo to light in their country. But outside Belgium, there are many people who do not know what happened there in the late 1800s. The attitude of Leopold and the people who worked for him in the Congo was particularly horrific. It ranged from disinterest to outright cruelty. It's estimated that anywhere between 1 and 10 million people died or were killed as a result of Leopold's occupation of the Congo. Latest estimates point towards the higher figure. Many hundreds of thousands were beaten, whipped, and otherwise abused. Infection from wounds caused hundreds of thousands of deaths, perhaps more.
Leopold II's monstrous actions likely killed a bigger part of the population of the Congo than Pol Pot killed in Cambodia. He probably killed more Congolese than Hitler killed Jews. John Cate, a freelance public relations specialist in Bethel, had lamentably said,
"But Leopold never warned anyone, least of all the poor people of the Congo. I'd call him a wolf in sheep's clothing, but that's insulting to wolves. What he did was demonic." People ask if statues of Leopold II should be taken down. The answer is that there should only be statues of him in hell.
One of the few good aspects about modern-day historical revisionism is that it is finally bringing to light just how evil the man, Leopold II, was in his time. And just hold on a second, amazing viewers. If you've gotten up to this point in this video, then it would mean that you've actually settled in and are having an interesting viewing already. Don't forget to kindly support our works if you are yet to by hitting that like button in front of you. Share video with your friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and kindly subscribe to stay put for more interesting contents in the way. We are delighted to have you always with us. Now let us proceed. There are quite a number of them, a whole lot, who in their time were monsters in those dark eras of slavery and brutal exploitation of Africans, but none of them was as insane as Leopold II. Leopold II would be better compared to Josef Mengele than Hitler. Adolf Hitler was an ideologue whose party produced many sadistic individuals and killed millions of innocent people in some of the most inhumane and painful ways possible, and began a war that destroyed Europe. However, Hitler himself did not have the stomach to see his own orders carried out. He never once visited a concentration camp and would cover his window on the train while riding past Jewish ghettos. Mind you, this is not meant to be any kind of defense of Hitler. He is still responsible for the immeasurable suffering of tens of millions. Leopold II, on the other hand, did not shy away from his own brutality, and unlike Hitler, he was not driven by any kind of radical ideology or belief in a greater cause. He was simply a walking, talking sack of all of humanity's most primitive evils, material greed, and the megalomaniacal desire to dominate and subjugate. That was all he was. While Hitler and Leopold were not so much alike in regards to their nature, it should be noted that while Leopold II would have had no use for men like Hitler, the Nazi ranks under Hitler were filled with men who were like, and worse than Leopold. Mengele, Himmler, Klein, Al-Husseini, Heydrich, Entres, Eichmann, von Zammern-Frankenegg, Tuka, and many, many more. All these were crazy men. The world has no shortage of evil men like Leopold II, but men like Hitler put them in positions of power to spread their poison. Simply put, Leopold II's deeds prove worse than Adolf Hitler or Nero, or even the Emperor Caligula. The sadistic king Leopold II of Belgium is the greatest genocidaire ever listed in the annals of humanity. Let's put it like this: a post-traumatically shocked soldier whose country has been devastated by outside financial and manufacturing interests trying to lead his people to some hope, compared to someone who grew up in luxury trying to make himself yet wealthier. That is how the comparison is between Hitler and Leopold II. We should never forget or forgive the mass murder of non-Aryans and degenerates by the Nazis, but even that horror pales against the horror of Leopold's predation of African people. Although it might be argued that the war Hitler precipitated killed more people, that might be overlooking the mass murder and other consequences of Leopold's regime in the century following his relinquishment of his personal empire. The Hutu-Tutsi mass killing being just one example. Europe has been able to rebuild since that war, but Africa is still struggling to do so. It should also be recognized that considerable blame for both the rise of Hitler and the war with Japan lie with vindictive economic policies of the Western powers against Germany through the Treaty of Versailles and against Japan through empire preference deals that cut Japan out of trade with most of its neighbors. There is a difficult balance to be struck between maintaining the horror at the actions of both the Nazis and the Japanese of that time, and the share of blame to be borne by the countries that chose to squeeze Japan and Germany so hard economically. Both were fighting back from being cornered and desperate. Simple truth. Leopold, in his case, had no such excuse. Suleiman Aras Ortak, an occupational health and safety therapist, had this to say about Leopold II.
Leopold II was the closest thing not human to devil ever to live on this planet. His actions was peak point for torture, violence, and imperialism and capitalism. The West almost never talks about him. The reason behind this is believed to be that his victims are not Christians or Jews or Westerners. His actions were a low point of humanity. If there is a God out there, then Leopold was Satan.
In the process of colonization led by Leopold, several Africans, especially the leaders who resisted, were murdered in cold blood. Millions of other Africans who risked their lives to demonstrate were killed and maimed. Many people do not know that actual mass human extermination is being committed by Western colonists in the millions, almost on the same scale as the murder of the Jews in World War II. The outbreak of the Second World War helped many Western countries to cover up their acts, evade justice and condemnation, and refocus all the attention of the world on Hitler and the Germans. However, people who are students of history should know that so many members of the Allies committed mass killings and serious human rights abuses in their African colonies. Deborah Lynn, here, had spoken with some healthy sarcasm on the matter. Here's what she said concerning the occasion.
Hitler is considered worse than King Leopold because he killed white people instead of black people. Of course, and it's not too amazing to see so many pale-skinned scholars on here say it wasn't deliberate on Leopold II's part, that he was just after money. Oh, really? Like it was almost some type of accident to commit such atrocity? Let me tell you, greedy people, especially those who commit mass killings, are always very deliberate. Leopold was simply smarter than Hitler in that he didn't announce his intentions. Hitler's war dead don't count. Europeans have been killing each other over land and power for centuries. The concentration camp dead, that's who belongs in any sort of mass murder count.
Leopold II, who very deliberately killed 10 to 15 million Congolese in one country, simply hid his demonic wolf ass in sheep's clothing. 15 million is a whole outrageous number, for Christ's sakes. Not only was the number of casualties outrageous, but the method most of it was carried out. Leopold II used brown-skinned humans like they were disposable diapers or something. He used humans in ways that he knew was killing them. And unlike chattel slavery used by whites in America, Leopold knew had an endless supply of slaves. He had no investment in free labor to protect. If one died, so what? Go find another one. He had the Congolese he enslaved using their own burning skin to collect rubber. He had hands and arms cut off as punishment. Dead black enslaved bodies were a known byproduct of getting that rubber out of the Free State of Congo and other things he wanted to steal from the Congolese. He was every bit as deliberate as Hitler, only he just wasn't as loud, but we can very well say that he was crazier. He is one of the worst mass murderers of all time. For people who don't know, he was king of Belgium during the time that Belgium colonized the Congo, then the Belgian Congo, and then Zaire, and now the Democratic Republic of Congo. The conditions under which he ruled were beyond appalling. You should read King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Hochschild and The Famous Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, a novelette based on his own experiences as a riverboat captain in the Congo. If that is not enough horror for you, then read Jules Marchal's Lord Leverhulme's Ghost about the basis of the soap industry in the 19th and early 20th centuries. You won't ever use soap without a shudder again after you have read this book. In the case of Joseph Conrad, he had begun his journey up the Congo River that would inspire the writing of his Heart of Darkness only 5 years after Belgium's King Leopold II took possession of the Congo as his personal estate at the Berlin Conference of 1885. The 6 months Conrad spent in Congo dramatically changed his life and led the sea captain to reflect until his death on the vilest scramble for loot that ever disfigured the history of human conscience and geographical exploration. 8 years later, when in his new career as writer Conrad recreated his Congo experiences, King Leopold's agents had almost stopped demanding tax payments of ivory in favor of the forced harvesting of natural rubber from the country's vast rainforests. Leopold's grand design, which first took shape on reading Henry Morton Stanley's descriptions of a country of unspeakable riches, waiting for an enterprising capitalist to take the matter in hand, was becoming a reality at the cost of unspeakable suffering of the Congolese people. By the time Conrad put his pen to paper, the country had become a place of darkness. Thus he had written in A Personal Record. It became a place of darkness not due to behaviors of the African population, but due to, in the words of one literary critic, the savage degradation of the white man in Africa that Conrad witnessed. The writer's discovery of the truth of Congo under Leopold's rule was greatly aided by his brief contact with the Irishman Roger Casement soon after arrival in the country. Casement's 1903 report for the British Foreign Service sparked worldwide condemnation of the Congo Free State and helped force Leopold's eventual abdication of rule over the country. Among the many personal accounts of brutality included in Casement's report was one from a Disciples of Christ missionary. A founder of the Disciples' first mission station at Belenge, Ellsworth Ferris, recounted in his diary an 1899 meeting with Free State agent Simon Roy. Each time the corporal goes out to get rubber, cartridges are given to him. He must bring back all not used, and for every one used, he must bring back a right hand. As to the extent to which this is carried on, Simon Roy informed that in 6 months, they, the state on the Momboyo River, had used 6,000 cartridges, which means that 6,000 people were killed or mutilated. Actually, this means much more than 6,000, as it was no longer news that the soldiers would often kill children as well with the butt of their guns. This wasn't counted amongst the 6,000. For Conrad himself, the 6 months in Congo resulted in a political awakening that shaped the rest of his life and his writing career. When he left for Africa, he was persuaded that although Leopold's enterprise aimed to make a profit, it was a noble and civilizing mission. Years after his Congo journey, Conrad declared to the literary critic Edward Garnett that at the time he had had not a thought in his head. Since Conrad's day, Congo has experienced political change, but the basic pattern of the exploitation of the nation's vast resources, primarily for the benefit of foreigners, has not changed. This spring's kidnapping and murder of a U.S. and Swedish UN investigator inquiring about the recent outbreaks of violence in the Kasai constitutes recent evidence that rule of the Congo is still marked by brutality and impunity. Current estimates are that Leopold was responsible for at least 10 million deaths, and that doesn't count mutilations. His men would punish the Congolese by chopping off hands or feet and ruin lives. All Leopold cared about was ivory, rubber, and palm oil for soap, and he didn't care what he did to get it. The 10 million estimate is only an approximation. No one was actually counting. How sad. Here are some of the results of his policy. A gruesome alteration of innocent people's lives and fate. A vast majority of the Congolese ended up this way, and even worse, tens of millions of them. And unfortunately, there is an obvious explanation why Hitler and Stalin are more notorious. Their victims were white Europeans. Leopold's were black Africans. People don't care as much about black deaths. Remember, we live in a world where a prestigious British scholarship is still called the Rhodes Scholarship, after the mass murderer Cecil Rhodes, the overlord of Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. It would be like calling a German scholarship the Eichmann Scholarship, after Adolf Eichmann, Hitler's architect of the mass killings. King Leopold II of Belgium, born April 9, 1835, was the worst sadistically racist maniac in modern world history. During his colonizing reign, he murdered an estimated 15 million African women, men, and children in the Congo, equaling about half the population, which is more than twice the 6 million Jews murdered by Hitler in Germany. To paraphrase Mark Antony in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, I come to condemn Leopold, not to praise him. This speaks volumes concerning the monstrous atrocities done by King Leopold to an entire African nation in the colonial era. For about 90,000 years, the Bantu people lived alone, that is, with no white folks, in Central Africa, a region that, due to its beautiful weather, colorful foliage, clear rivers, and tropical scenery, has been described as heaven on earth. But then the devil arrived. In 1885, Leopold and his army of demons arrived, and for 23 years until 1908, he hellishly colonized the Congo, now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, and previously known as Zaire, and turned it into his private multi-billion corporation. In the process, he viciously forced the indigenous people to produce massive daily quotas of ivory, and later much more massive daily quotas of rubber. If they failed to reach their nearly impossible quotas, he'd have their hands, arms, or legs chopped off, have them raped, and have them murdered. He had limb huts constructed throughout the country to collect and publicly display severed body parts to systematically terrorize the black populace. He had rape huts constructed to sexually brutalize the black women and girls. Things were so horrific that they shocked the conscience of many whites during that time. For example, John Harris, an English missionary, wrote, "I have just returned from a journey in the Congo. The abject misery and utter abandon is indescribable." Professor Jean Stengers, a Belgian historian who wrote profusely about that period, described the rubber-producing areas of the Congo as areas transformed into veritable hells on earth. Mark Twain sardonically ridiculed the Belgian monarch in King Leopold's soliloquy. Arthur Conan Doyle, author of Sherlock Holmes, in 1909 penned The Crime of the Congo to expose Leopold's brutality as a crime against humanity. Joseph Conrad's 1902 book, Heart of Darkness, was a fictional but accurate account of Leopold's barbaric reign, and that book was later made into a movie, Apocalypse Now, starring Marlon Brando. But the greatest denunciation came from Roger Casement, an Irish nationalist and Easter Rising leader, who, surprisingly, wrote Britain's official document regarding Leopold's wickedness in the Congo. That document, dated 1903, is entitled The Casement Report, and it goes into gory detail. It's both a must-read and a disturbing read. Although Leopold was clearly the head monster, he had several demonic lieutenants whose sadism was horrific. They included, among several others, Léon Rome, known as the Devil, René de Parmentier, known as the Butcher of Congo, and Léon Fivez, known as the Head Collector, who often boasted of having 100 heads cut off. Leopold and his demons weren't alone in their devilment. They were enabled by the active support of 14 European nations, along with the United States when they co-signed his wickedness during the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, where Africa was sliced up like a pie by greedy white countries. It was because Europe and America banded together to gang rape and mass murder their African colonies that the relatively small country of Belgium was able to dominate the Congo, which covered an expanse of 910,000 square miles and was a whopping 76 times larger in landmass. Unfortunately, Italian anarchist Gennaro Rubino couldn't shoot straight and missed each of the 3 shots he fired on November 15, 1902, when he tried to assassinate Leopold. The Italian anarchist died on March 14, 1918, in the prison of Leuven, Belgium. These were the words of Gennaro Rubino before his death. "Maybe tomorrow or later, I will be able to demonstrate my rebellion in a way that is more consistent with mine and your aspirations. But the Creator caught up with the devil 7 years later on December 17, 1909, and sent him back to hell. Historian Adam Hochschild disclosed that when international outrage began to mount, due in large part to the Casement Report, Leopold was pressured to leave the Congo and give up his authority over it. Shortly thereafter, the furnaces near his palace burned for 8 days, turning most of the Congo state records to ash and smoke. This was followed by Leopold's renowned statement,
"I will give them my Congo, but they have no right to know what I did there."
"Oh yes, they do. We are making sure today." That brings us to the end of yet another thought-provoking video segment. And if you learned a thing or two, do not hesitate to support our works by only hitting that like button in front of you. Share with your friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to keep getting notified for more in the future, whilst you also help in building the rising membership of this channel. We are delighted to have you always with us. Thank you for watching.